Hello and welcome to something a little different. Today I'm going to be taking a look at a DLC size addition to our evergreen game, an entirely new area with multiple dungeons, bosses and some shiny new loot with interesting effects. I am of course talking about Wyrmstooth. This adventure mod has recently been added onto the Xbox and it looks to be the kind of thing we can all get behind. When playing the main storyline, after returning to a town at the end of the Way of the Voice quest, I was approached by an Imperial called Theoden BN, and this is where the story begins. To not give too much away, we're sent on a few small errands which lead to us meeting a group of mercenaries tasked with defeating a dragon, but there's a missing member to their team. You. Naturally, the initial fight with the dragon didn't go quite as planned, but that's all part of the storytelling. A few miniature quest steps later, you'll find yourself on a boat headed to a new land, the island of Wyrmstooth. The fog rolling in across the mountains and large, strangely shaped trees are the first things to greet you. All you know is you must follow the leader of this ragtag group of dragon slayers, Larius Lior. To avoid giving away spoilers, I'm going to largely keep away from describing events and focusing more on how it played, features and its designs. However, if you're interested in a playthrough of this, I would be happy to do that. Instantly I was impressed with how Wyrmstooth integrated itself into the story. Right from the beginning it felt like it was cut content, but as if the content was cut because it was too experimental or too ahead of everything else inside the game that it stood out so much, and as such made other events seem lesser. When it comes to Wyrmstooth, I suggest you expect the unexpected. It's a mod rich in design in so many different ways. To start with, the sizable new land is filled with new scenes at the roadside. The trees and differing environments write their own story. It's a space thick with fog, teeming with wildlife and people, both enemies and friends. The map is dotted with markers to explore and so many different types of location. It has the feeling of being designed by a professional team of game makers. It is essentially Solstium, but genuinely better. Imagine if the stories within the Dragonborn DLC were deeper and had events within them that were so outside of the norm. For example, at one point you control a Draugr through the use of a spell to get around a locked door. This is something akin to Ratchet and Clank level of fun and ingenuity, but the way it's implemented feels so fantastic. It's done so well that you'll question why more events like this aren't in Skyrim to begin with. This thought process is clearly what led to character design and story building too. And I personally want to talk about the former. Character design within this DLC, and I'm going to call it that for now, the DLC, is far superior to anything in Skyrim. We aren't talking Inigo level of brilliance, but the characters all have their own sense of identity, and the voice acting does a fantastic job of showing this off. Not only the mercenaries and the main characters, but the villain, almost taunting, but also thankful to find his match, which makes him one of the most rounded villains in this game. I would liken the writing and events surrounding the villain to something in a Final Fantasy game. There's a level of arrogance being backed up by powers beyond anything we've seen yet. A clear and driven plan for the antagonist which is set in motion early on. We get to see multiple stages of this and it ramps up the tension, which in turn makes the storyline feel worthy of our time. I'm going to briefly talk about the area design again, and I'll incorporate enemy spawns into that as well. The island is huge, roughly the size of Solstium, but the layout is where it wins against the Dragonborn DLC. Some areas are more hospitable in terms of landscape and weather. These places are filled with life and dungeons, whereas the colder areas are more sparse. That's not to say empty, but a realistic amount of life is located here, and what is there tends to be stronger. My first run through the early areas of the map had me face up against two dragons with the fortunate aid of a few giants. Luckily, the map gives plenty of cover to fight from in the form of giant mushroom trees and ancient structures, which came in extremely handy. I highly suggest taking the opportunity to explore the map as early as possible, and you'll see so many different areas with different dungeons, forts and camps with plenty of fighting to be had. Marauders are the main bandit style enemy, and clearly they're an issue for the remaining farmers and miners, so take your time to end that problem and help out the new civilization. I want to give a quick review on a few of the things going on here, and I'll measure them out of 10. When it comes to story, I'd give this DLC a 9 out of 10. It hits many key points. I was gripped by the overall narrative and how it's weaved together. This feels like it was made at a studio with a ton of professional writers. The only downside is there wasn't enough of it, and that's mostly me being greedy. The story will take about 3 hours, but there's also a lot to do beyond this, upwards of 20 hours of new experiences. Character work I'd also give a 9 out of 10. The voice lines are well written and delivered. The naming, the looks and the actions are all fantastic. The new followers felt different from anything else in the vanilla game, and the town had a good helping of vendors and NPCs, as did the roads. The only downside was some of the additional world-filling NPCs didn't really have much to say. Map design is a solid 10 out of 10. It blends so many features of fantasy games and even blends designs from Solstium and Skyrim into one beautiful amalgamation. It's realistic in spacing and I have no idea how they could improve it. Genuinely extraordinary work. And finally, difficulty. This is really going to depend on what else you're using, but all the basics are there to make this as hard as you need it to be. There are dragons, giants, marauders and a host of other spawns. Certainly enough going on that your own difficulty mods will dictate it, but even at base the sheer number of spawns and setups make this an 8 out of 10 here, but possibly even all the way up to 10 if you're slightly more sadistic. So overall I have to suggest trying this mod out. The cost of 245 megabytes shouldn't remotely be off-putting. If you want more game in your game, this is the answer. It does everything I wanted Bruma to do for 1/10 of the cost. Expect to see this in my next few load orders. I'm also looking to build an order based around mods like this which would increase the world size for the largest Skyrim possible. If this interests you, comment with your favourite new land mods so I can add them in. I am going to end this here though. I highly suggest playing this mod. It's one of the most fun additions I've ever played. It's fun, intelligent, and best of all, new, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, so leave a comment with those. The Discord server is currently evolving and hitting its stride, so I'd really love to see you all over there to talk Skyrim, Fallout, and everything in between. You'll find a link in the description below. If this has helped, I would really appreciate those likes, comments, and new subscriptions. They let me know you want more content like this. But either way, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.